Everyone, my name is Justin King. I'm a director at Milltown Partners, and I'm also going to be your host for the rest of the day. I hope you've had the opportunity to enjoy some lunch and reflect on the talks from this morning. We have a great program lined up for you this afternoon. Our first session focuses on responsible AI development and deployment. It'll feature a conversation about how we can put the right structures in place to guide responsible AI development and what socio-technical approaches to AI evaluation and safety can look like in practice. We're starting with a discussion between Dorothy Chou and Aaron Rosenberg. Aaron leads London and European investment activities and operations for Radical Ventures, where he helps build world-class AI platforms and companies. Dorothy leads policy and public engagement at DeepMind and is an angel investor with the VC firm Atomico. She holds extensive experience in the tech sector, having worked at Uber, Dropbox, and Google. Now, Aaron and Dorothy are going to come up and have a conversation, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. This is very much a Q&A, so when I say questions, please keep the statements to a minimum, just very quick questions, so we can continue to move on with the program. Please join me in welcoming Aaron Rosenberg and Dorothy Chou to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thanks for joining us for this time. Aaron, I wanted to kick it off by asking you a few questions and just asking you to explain Radical to the crowd. But the first thing is, when we look at emerging technologies, and you're investing in emerging technologies, I'm working in emerging technologies, the nodes of change in society are generally characterized as markets, what's happening in the space of the markets, normative behaviors, how do companies decide how safe is safe enough to release something, and then laws to basically scale some of those normative behaviors. And when I look at what's happening in AI right now, a lot of what's driving markets, laws, and norms is the VC hype cycle, putting billions of dollars into a lot of these AI startups and actually just naturally creating the market and the norms that we operate within. I'm super curious about how Radical sees this. I mean, you all invest in machine learning startups, and you've recently released a responsible framework for diligencing, which I'm super interested in terms of how that shapes the market. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah, it's great to be here with you in particular. Dorothy and I go way back. We actually spent several years working together at Google DeepMind, in those days DeepMind. And it's great to be with all of you here today, and I suppose those virtually. To share a little bit about Radical as context for maybe this conversation, we as a firm are dedicated exclusively to investing in and supporting machine learning founders, and have been since our inception in 2017. And indeed, from that date, we began to demonstrate responsibility and wanted to strengthen that commitment over the course of time. At the outset, what that looked like was we included in all of our term sheets a clause that stipulated that we required our companies in which we were making investments to engage with us in discussion and deliberation on the topic of responsibility and safety. At the time, this was extraordinary, so much so that lawyers would consistently, in the course of revising the term sheets, pick out that clause and say, this is not normal, what is this, you should remove this. And it was not until repeated instances of us requiring that remain intact that they finally sort of dropped that and realized we weren't going to just sort of do away with this. Since then, we've been seeking to strengthen that commitment, and as you noted, the latest instantiation of this is in this framework that we are putting out to the broader venture early stage investor community for everyone's benefit. The idea being, and indeed we're actually even hosting it on GitHub in true sort of open source style, not just to be sort of playful about it, but because that is a very helpful repository for allowing branching and individuals to adopt the material and adapt it in their own way, and then ideally contribute back with learnings from their own use and use cases and sort of experiences so that we broadly can develop this material further. We think that this is something that's really critical because we take seriously the responsibility that we bear in investing in these companies. All of the major players that we have today who are participating in the summit later this week are either currently still venture-backed companies or were once venture-backed companies. The Alphabets, the Metas, the Anthropics, Coheres, all of these, they all are or were venture-backed companies. And as we think about the opportunity we have today, every day, to decide the fate of, or the sort of trajectory of these early stage companies, we take seriously the possibility that we are today founding, or we are helping to support, to back the future Metas of the world, the future, DeepMinds of the world. And so we think it's really critical that we take that role seriously, that we incorporate consideration of safety and responsibility at the earliest of stages and try to shift the sort of distribution of potential outcomes towards ones that are more favorable by taking actions to mitigate the potential risks of this general purpose technology and promote the benefits to humanity.
I hear you on all of that, but part of the challenge of course, building a business and actually returning funds to your LPs is that this is a business. This isn't a nonprofit. So do you actually see any tension between maybe missing out on some deals that it will be really lucrative because you're putting this in place? Like, how do you think about making the business case for putting some of these standards in your term sheets?
Yeah, it's a very reasonable question. And I think we see a lot in the press and from many very vocal individuals, this dichotomy between responsibility and innovation, or safety and success, commercial success particularly. We view this differently. We tend to see these more as mutually reinforcing versus mutually exclusive. The way that we see this technology ultimately being adopted is largely through businesses, through companies, and even individuals who want to know that this tool that they are adopting will do good, will not create excessive risk or harm to individuals physically, psychologically, socially, environmentally. And if a given company can give assurance, can convey confidence that the way in which they are leveraging machine learning will result in benefits to those customers while avoiding all of those potential risks that come with such a powerful tool, then they're more likely to succeed commercially. There's a lot of wariness about adoption of new tools in general, and the more that these customers can gain the confidence, that conviction that this tool will be valuable for them, the better off everyone will be. And so for us, safety and responsibility are very much part and parcel of commercial success. It's almost impossible, actually, to have such commercial success in the long term without the foundation of safety and responsibility in place.
How do you think founders are reacting to this? I mean, I think there's obviously a huge range of what founders are like and what they value, and part of what your experience and my experience is that these early stage companies actually all deeply reflect the values and the personalities even of all of their founders. So how do they respond to you guys pushing a bit of this, like, we want this responsibility clause in the term sheet? What does that look like?
Yeah, Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, I mentioned this sort of framework that we are putting out, and it's on GitHub, and we can share some more information about it for anyone to access. To give a sense, the framework itself is quite comprehensive. It's sort of split into a few different buckets of questions that investors can ask themselves to understand this dimension of responsibility. Particularly, you mentioned, Dorothy, at the outset, that there's been this influx of capital to early stage AI investing, and that a lot of those funds are coming without as much experience in machine learning specifically, or in speaking with founders of this kind. And so we really want to share the sort of learnings that we've had, and offer this as a tool that ideally flexibly allows for the practice of the principles that these firms want to uphold. So as you'll see if you look at the materials, they're broadly broken down into a few different categories of sort of ethical and social considerations, industry-specific regulations, and technical dimensions of safety and risk. The idea being that you can then seek, it serves as sort of a repository of questions that you could consider asking in the course of diligence, and also then complements that with a sort of series of mitigations, which we think are really critical to begin encouraging at the earliest of stages, again, so as to generally nudge these companies onto more favorable trajectories. You asked the question, how do these founders respond to some of these conversations that we've had? What has been remarkable to me is the degree to which the conversation per se serves as a signal. What I mean by that is, we have this framework, it's comprehensive, it's great, it's valuable. For me, it helps provide an impetus for engaging with some of these founders. And if the founder relishes that opportunity, has thought deeply about the notions of safety and responsibility and how to practice that in the course of their business, what it means for them as a large language model provider or a application in drug discovery or in the law or whatever field it can be, because machine learning is so general purpose and there are so many different types of companies that can arise. If they relish that opportunity and want to share generously the knowledge and sort of thought that they've put into such consideration, that serves as a very positive signal. It suggests there's a degree of alignment, and we are more likely to back that individual over the many years and possibly decades to come. And if instead that individual responds with some recoil and is more reticent to have that conversation, or views responsibility as secondary, an afterthought, an addendum, then we are less likely to have the next conversation.
Yep.
And so it helps to almost mitigate some of the issues that arise in such adverse selection when there is such information asymmetry, trying to understand what a founder might, the beliefs or principles that a founder may hold, and how those sort of correspond with those that we have. So there are some founders that are really keen on having that conversation, some others that are not, and that itself is a useful filter. If I think about one of the founders that has been the most impressive, with whom we've both had a great deal of exposure and the privilege of working closely, Demis Hassabis, the founder and CEO of DeepMind, he felt strongly about the need to take seriously responsibility and ethics and the way in which DeepMind's technologies would ultimately impact the world from the earliest of stages.
Yep.
And one of the great sources of pride for me personally was working with you and with so many others to craft what we called the operating principles.
Yep.
And then sit on the institutional review committee that governed, based on those principles, what research and applications we would pursue or not. And I think we both benefited from having such diversity of perspectives around the room,
Yes.
around the table, in those deliberations, which were difficult. I'm curious, I know this is something that you have kept as a sort of theme more broadly in your life, and especially in your angel investing work. What are you seeing when it comes to fostering sort of or cultivating a diverse community in the startup ecosystem, and particularly for those who may be similarly inclined to support that outcome? What advice might you have?
I mean, I think that the history of venture investing, especially in AI, shows how challenging it is to build a diverse sector. It's definitely something that the AI sector really struggles with. There aren't that many people like me in the room when key decisions are being made, and so that's something I've always felt really, to your point, strongly about. And I was thinking a lot about how to extend that type of culture that's created by Demis and our COO, Lila Ibrahim, as well, to bring interdisciplinary voices around a table to make those crucial decisions about how safe is safe enough and when are we going to release something that's going to set a standard for the rest of the industry. So one of the things I started doing about 2 years ago is just putting small angel checks into companies led by diverse founders, building based on their lived experiences for their communities. And I think what's interesting is that you see a real commitment to public benefit in a way that they are thinking about the company, constructing how they build the governance institutions, and what they're prioritizing these emerging technologies addressing. So 2 examples I'd love to share. One is called Justice Text. Built actually by a former DeepMind intern in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. And she basically is working with public defenders in the US to help them comb through police body camera footage to help support defendants who otherwise, first of all, can't afford services, right? That's why they have public defenders who defend them in the courts and really address the criminal justice inequities that are in place. She could obviously use language models to do a lot of other things, but that's how she's choosing to build the application. And the types of contracts they're going after are government contracts, which are actually really hard to pursue relative to some of these other big private firms. So super interesting. Another one is a founder who's based in the UK who's helping to streamline insurance referrals for better healthcare. And if you look at the way that works both in the States and the UK, it can take you weeks and months to get the kind of services, if you're using private insurance, that you need in terms of your health. And a lot of that is done manually, but to do that and figure out how to use large language models to assist nurses in securing those services more quickly, especially for people who don't have the means to afford a lot of these extra services, it just makes a huge difference for a whole bunch of people. And then what you're able to do effectively as a venture capitalist is create the market, like build that market, the new markets that we need to actually use AI for public good that still have private sector speed and also returns that are really interesting to look at. So I'm super excited about working with these founders. I think it's something that the industry will hopefully be shifting towards as we use capital and policy to create better and newer and more beneficial markets using AI.
Excellent. Well, we've talked, I think, a fair amount about the earlier stages of technology development. You, of course, still hold a very important position at Google DeepMind, which is increasingly the leader in this field, certainly a significant voice of influence, and a place where we share as a sort of alumnus and current employee. Mm-hmm. What are some of the priorities for you today in that capacity? How is Google DeepMind trying to shape the sort of landscape for the good?
Yeah, I'll start with a little bit of what's happening externally and then shift to internal operations, because I think both are important. I mean, I think the regulatory activity we see is incredibly important for us to engage with constructively. When you think about how AI is disproportionately a private sector funded technology breakthrough, which is very different from the other big breakthroughs we've seen from a science perspective. Most of those were publicly funded, which means a lot of the, from a philosophy perspective, a lot of the moral knowledge, a lot of the agency about what we release and when comes down to the companies themselves. So I think the burden of moral labor and moral responsibility has certainly shifted more and more to the private sector. And so it's really important for us to engage constructively with governments as they figure out, for example, the White House executive order, which came out yesterday and established all kinds of rulemaking powers across the federal government in the US. It's important for us to engage in those conversations and share what we know, what the latest is, where we see the puck going, and helping the government skate towards that quickly. And so that's something we really look forward to sharing more and more and working constructively with them on. Everything from standards around reporting to evaluations to standards like watermarking and detecting synthetic content in the lead up to, I think, at least 4 major elections coming in next year. We have the US, the UK, the EU, and India. Like, it's a really interesting time for AI and figuring out how to set up the right guardrails around that. And so we're excited to do that with governments around the world. And I think from an internal perspective too, there's a lot of interesting policy work that can be done. And I'm not just talking about compliance, although that certainly is a part of it, because compliance is not enough for public trust. That's like just a baseline. I think what we're talking about is innovation too. When you look at, if you remember when we were in school, we are all using Napster and Kazaa to download music. A couple of people have heard me say this before, but when you think about the evolution of Napster to Apple iTunes, and that evolution, what you're looking at that underpin that is not just a product innovation, it's also a policy innovation. It's an innovation of the digital rights management system that shifted how we stream music online. And then you take another step from there, from iTunes to Spotify, which most of us are using today, and that's an innovation, the licensing of music. So that's also a policy change that fundamentally changed the product design. Now, for me, because I'm not on the technical side, I'm still streaming music from my computer. But I do think the quality of the service we're using and the institutions underpinning that governance have shifted how we consume. And so what I want to understand is, and I challenge the team regularly internally, is what's that policy change going to be in AI that will shift how we use the technology more and more widely and for greater benefit? That's something I'm really excited about coming up, and hoping that we can brainstorm with civil society and government to do better.
Amazing. Well, I think we probably asked each other enough questions that we have a bit of time remaining, and would love for any questions from the audience, or maybe responses to Dorothy's very provocative prompt, what policy change may result in more favorable outcomes. Is there anyone? I see some hands here and back there. Yeah, sorry. Oh, I guess I have to pick. Sorry. Why don't we go back there? Yeah. Oh, right there. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Rose, and I'm a mental health consultant, and I'm an ex-therapist. What I found being a therapist, especially when like social media was booming, was that we had a lot of people coming into a session overwhelmed by the impact of social media, the psychological harm. So with the rise of AI and responsible AI, what kind of preventative measures do you think should be put in place to protect psychological harm? Because we've seen what's already happened before with social media. What do you think might happen with AI? And do you have any ideas around standard processes that we need to have in place from a policy point of view?
You want to start? I can.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think you make such a good point around the onslaught of information coming at us, and that's something that's very hard to parse. I do think that there's 2 things that are extremely important in this. One is that facilitating AI literacy is incredibly important. And one of the things I'm actually nervous about is that we end up regulating for the current manifestations of AI instead of thinking through the broad scope of what AI can and is supposed to do in society. So I'm nervous, for example, about chatbot regulation, just because that's the current fad. But that's incredibly different from a lot of the systems that I just described that these companies are working towards, right? And so I think us as companies, and also governments and civil society, like being very practical and working together on how to ensure people are properly educated about what AI can do, how it's supposed to benefit your life, and how you can integrate it into your life and take some control and agency over that is incredibly important. I also think we miss the boat on things like AI legibility. A lot of the things that we could be doing with AI aren't possible because we haven't quite figured out how to make data and other serious components legible enough for AI to be a part of daily life. And so I think it's a combination of education, public education being a priority, and also how we manage the integration of our day-to-day lives into AI. So both of those pieces are going to be incredibly important for us to be able to manage and take control over. Like, that's probably where I would take the...
I agree with both of those points, and maybe to add a third, I think engaging with people like yourself, Rose, is critical in this. I could offer some guess, and that might be an informed guess, would not be as informed as your perspective, given the experiences that you've already just shared in your brief background, and from individuals like yourself who are professionals in the field, who have the necessary expertise to offer advice. And so I think for companies developing technologies that have any number of potential applications, including in mental health,
Yes.
it's critical to bring into the conversation such seasoned perspectives. And I think, indeed, when we think about companies at the application layer, so not to say foundation models or sort of the hardware or infrastructure, when you're thinking more about that last sort of layer in the stack, as people often sort of characterize this, we seek founding teams that possess both the technical acumen, the ability to engineer these models in the ways necessary to leverage the latest architectures and innovations in the field of machine learning, plus the domain-specific expertise who can offer, individuals who can offer both the sort of proper context and advice and guidance in shaping the product, ultimately to serve the customers as best as possible, and who can, from a business perspective, have the relationships necessary with whether they're regulators or other partners or suppliers to support the success of the venture. So we often try to look for like that kind of package of technical and domain excellence. And we find that often leads to success.
Aaron reminds me we're actually releasing a preview of a report of 9 different roundtables we've run with different civil society experts in different verticals, we come to the table and we say, you all are the experts, here's where we see the technology going. Where do you see it impacting the disability community, for example? Where do you see it impacting food security? Because it's such a wide-ranging set of applications, which I think we're putting online today. I'm looking at my team. We're putting online today just as a starting point for our conversation as we do this work in discovering the different ways that people think AI should be used and making sure that folks with expertise outside the company are brought in.
I think we might have time for 1 or maybe 2 if they're really quick. So if you keep the question short, we can ask another perspective. Maybe we'll go here. I think you had a question before, and then back to you if there's time. Also looking for someone to tell me to get off the stage at some point. Yeah.
Hi, Resham from the Open Data Institute. We've talked a lot now and over the course of the 2 days about the role that governments have to play, policymakers, the companies themselves, the investors, and it's great to hear. I haven't heard much about what we as consumers could and should be doing to encourage responsible AI. So what are your thoughts on the role we have to play in incentivizing companies to be responsible?
You want to take this?
Boy, okay, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of it I think comes down to, I'm gonna butcher the phrase. There's, you sort of you walk with your feet, or walking.
With your feet.
That's it. Voting with your feet. This is why she's. I would often flub, and then she would correct me, and that would yield to better outcomes. But at least I put something on the table. I think that's. I mean, a big part of this is there is truly a proliferation of innovation occurring. And it's what's been crazy to me as I've been entering this world of investing. I've been at Radical now for just over 6 months, so I'm still sort of getting my feet wet. And what I found so amazing is that I'll speak with a founder and I'll say, wow, that's an amazing idea, like that's incredible. And then I'll go and I'll talk to my team, the broader Radical investment team, and people will say, oh yeah, we've heard of like 30 of those, or 40, or 50, or 100. And it's always remarkable to me just how crowded this space, and I think what that means for me is that there's a great deal of choice that's possible, and so it's rare that we have a paucity or a deficit of opportunities, companies in which we can invest as on our side. Similarly, I think as consumers, there will be many different model providers that you can use, not just ChatGPT. There will be many different applications of various kinds, whether in enterprise settings for understanding all the documents you have internally and how best to navigate those, search those, retrieve answers, or in drug discovery settings, which platform to use to help you identify new molecular candidates. As consumers, which I don't know which shopping. I'm not very consumer oriented, but which shopping app or you choose to use, a social media platform. In that choice comes power and responsibility. So being thoughtful about how you spend your scarce resources, be they money or especially time, I think is a decision that one can take more seriously or actively versus sort of passively following the crowd, maybe. I don't know. That's a quick response. What are you?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think from the investing side, it's the same, which is instead of just following the hype cycle, I think you guys are making some really intentional decisions, just more of what we need. So I think we're out of time, but thank you all for this, and thank you, Aaron, for sharing the stage.
Thank you, Dorothy.
And I think we have some exciting stuff coming up.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you all.